Okay. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, today's the second Saturday of the month, which means it's time for Moving Medicine Forward with Dr. Michael Klaper and Dr. Zach Burns. And today they're going to be addressing the question, how the heck do cows get bird flu? Please welcome them to the show. Klaper and Burns, it sounds like a vaudeville act to me.
Sometimes it feels like it too. Yes, I agree.
Well, Dr. Klaper, we can't say this on the air, but the funniest joke I ever heard was the joke you told me at True North about the stewardess on the red eye. And I've told that joke to Dr. McDougall. I've told that joke to everyone. I give you credit, and I wish we could tell it on the air, but it's this is a PG show. But that you have a great sense of humor and you're a great storyteller. So tell us a story. Bird flu, cows. How does anybody get bird flu? But how does a cow get bird flu?
Indeed. Dr. Burns, you want to lead off there, and I'll fill in around the details there. Where's bird flu come from, and what's going on here? Why is it an issue at all?
Sure. Well, great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is our fifth show in the series, and I'm enjoying it. Next time, the sixth show will be a full Q&A, but this time I felt a duty, really, to talk about avian influenza, or bird flu for short. Now, neither of us are virologists or epidemiologists, but anyone who's following this epidemic can see what's going on. And as physicians and with my public health degree, I do feel this obligation to talk about it, because otherwise things just keep happening behind the scenes. So what is bird flu? Well, it's a strain of influenza, right? The virus, and it's the H5N1 strain. And we're talking about proteins that give a virus their sort of genetic blueprint. H5N1 first emerged in China about 20 years ago, and it's been moving around sporadically, but there's been a proper outbreak since 2020. And it's mostly affected birds, wild birds, poultry, but increasingly it's infecting wild animals like rodents, foxes, opossums, skunks. It's affecting pets, and it's also more recently affecting dairy cows. So how is this possible? We're going to get into it. We'll talk about some of the details of the virus and the conditions that allow these viruses to spread. Dr. K, any introductory info from your side?
Yes, thank you. Well, that certainly sets the stage. Viruses, of course, have been around on this planet, longer than humans have, and they're a very primitive form of, you can't even say life, in that they're not truly alive. They don't really respire and do the things, turn sugars into energy like living cells do. But they are little pieces of DNA wrapped in protein that can get into cells of all different species and change their DNA, basically take over their DNA and produce the more viral proteins. And we think of, I got a virus, got a cold, and indeed these are many of these that we're talking about, the H5N1, the H7N9. These are in the coronavirus family, and coronaviruses are the ones that cause the common cold. And up till recently, that common cold virus, we've been kind of dismissing it as unimportant. Well, it turns out that the common cold virus has some ornery big brothers, variants of the cold virus DNA. Now, they're absolutely fearsome, and they certainly can be lethal. Question how it got into bird populations to begin with. There's some speculation it may have recently come from bats, and as the bats fly over the chicken yards, their droppings get on the ground and the chickens consume them. But there's no question it certainly set up housekeeping in the bird population. And we're talking about wild birds, but very importantly, we're talking about the billions of chickens, the layer hens, the broiler hens, these hens that are cooped up in these atrocious factory farming sheds. where they get sick and cough on each other and spread the virus around. Let me just show you some quick slides here. But the reality is that this is how chickens are raised essentially everywhere around the world, certainly in North America, South America, China, etc. And and as I said, the birds get sick, they cough on each other, they share their secretions, and as a result, the virus spreads through the entire flock very quickly. And this is a lethal virus. If you are a chicken, it certainly will kill the chickens, but it gets out into the wild bird population. And the terns and the hawks and the pelicans, et cetera, who are eating, who are sharing the food, et cetera, are sharing the virus around, and it's lethal to them. The problem is that the virus is perfectly happy to leave the dead carcass of a dead bird that it killed, and when that carcass is then eaten by a scavenger, by a fox or a mink or a seal, the virus is happily able to jump now into this not only a new animal, but a different species. The birds are not mammals. But this virus rearranges its DNA. It's a really good mutator, and it equips itself for flourishing in the mammalian body. And oh, how it has spread through the mammal population of our planet. This virus, once it got into the population of seals, again, they eat the dead birds, and it gets into their tissues, and they swap secretions as they mate, et cetera, et cetera. And this has been especially catastrophic to the seals, sea lions, sea elephants. As you can see, avian influenza killed virtually all newborn pups at peak seasons in Argentina. This is a catastrophic mortality. The adult seals and the infants were dying off in huge numbers, and it really decreased the entire population of elephant seals. As you can see, it's also caused the death of thousands of South American sea lions. The same with seals. Sea lions have external ears, seals don't. But it's been found in seabirds, particularly the species of terns, etc. This virus is just canniballing through the wild populations, and it's causing devastating upsets in the chain because, of course, the seals eat fish, so they're part of the ecosystem. And when you take them out, it unbalances the systems throughout the natural world. But us being very human-centric, we get concerned. Well, we've seen this virus jump from species to species, from birds to mammals, and then from mammal to mammal, from birds to foxes to mink to seals, etc. Human beings are mammals. If this virus got into human bodies, could it mutate and start setting up housekeeping in the human physiology? Well, it's not a question anymore. It absolutely can happen and has happened. Now, there's been 11 cases of the bird flu virus being responsible for serious illness in humans. Now, every one of these 11 people worked in chicken slaughterhouses. So they were breathing the spray of chicken blood, et cetera, all day. And so they got a really hefty dose of the virus in these particular unfortunate 11 folks. But the question, of course, but the real issue is that the virus was able to do it, was able to shift its DNA. It mutated to be able to live inside the human body and survive the onslaught from human antibodies, et cetera. It clearly can jump species barriers, and it can clearly jump into human beings. And so we are talking about the potential. If this gets out into respiratory secretions, people start coughing this virus out. The last link of the chain, that we've seen is, we've already seen the virus go from from bats to to wild birds to chickens to the seals, et cetera, to the humans. It can get into the human population by inhaling blood droplets, et cetera. Can it then get into respiratory secretions? The last link is human to human transmission. Can a person with this virus in their lung secretion who's coughing spread this out to other people, like we saw happen with the COVID virus? We're looking at human transmission. We're a hair's breadth from that. But this is how serious this problem is, and yet you don't see it on the 6 o'clock news. We're just hoping this will either go away by itself, or that the scientists will come up with some vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. But there is this malignant force out there, a cough or two away from us here. And we really got to stop ignoring this and pretending this isn't happening. Look at what is happening to the natural world, and we are part of the natural world. So this is just me waving a big red flag here, saying we need to pay attention to this. And with that, I will turn the mic back over to Dr. Burns and tell us where the chain goes from here. But it's certainly within the mammalian species on this planet.
All right. Well, I was thinking of painting the picture of the modern poultry facility, so it becomes more clear how these things fester and spread. There are several reasons why the modern broiler, that's the industry term for the chicken that when we put it on the table, we're having chicken for dinner. They call it a broiler. It's been selectively bred to grow extremely quickly, to convert the conversion ratio of feed. They want to feed it as little as possible and allow it to grow as fat as possible, because that's economically optimal. So they've really perfected this. It's been going on for decades. They've perfected this genetic breed. Well, sort of perfect short term, but it has some trade-offs. One is that there's genetic homogeneity, so that these broiler birds have this, it's like a monoculture. You've heard of monoculture with corn, and they're almost like clones. And so that means that when there's less genetic variety, their immune systems are compromised. That's one issue. Another issue is that they grow so quickly that they're developing, in many cases, congestive heart failure. Their rate of growth is so unnatural that their circulatory system, the heart pumping blood throughout their bodies, can't keep up with the musculoskeletal growth, making a baby chick to a big fat bird ready to be slaughtered. And that causes congestive heart failure. You can't have an optimized immune system in a state of congestive heart failure. Another issue that they face is constant inspiration of ammonia gas from all the feces that define their existence in that shed. They can't possibly clean and treat the fecal matter from chickens just existing amongst each other in those tight conditions. And so, but the ammonia gas from the feces becomes part of their milieu. Okay, so they breathe it in, their lungs are burned, they're compromised in terms of immune function that way. Remember, this is a respiratory virus. They need good lungs, they need good clearance. What are some other issues? Well, one, it's just the close confinement. They're on top of each other. They don't have space to move. They're deprived in virtually all cases of sunlight, of fresh air. Remember that when a case is identified in a poultry shed, they have to cull the shed, C-U-L-L. It's the euphemism from the industry of kill, all right? So they can't let the infection spread. So if they identify one case, it might be in a shed of 100,000 chickens. Well, that's the end of the story. They're going to be slaughtered that day, and they won't be fit for consumption. So it's just a waste. Oftentimes, they dig huge holes in the ground and dump hundreds of thousands of chicken bodies into those. That's an issue in itself. We got methane gas coming up and contributing as a potent greenhouse gas, the climate issue. But you also have when these birds are cold, the practices are reprehensible. So oftentimes they basically turn off ventilation shut down. So what does that mean? You're in this shed with all the birds breathing in the fecal matter and everything, and they turn off the fans. So within an hour or two, the temperature in that facility is so high that the birds overheat. They basically die of heat stroke, all amongst each other, on top of each other. Then another method is nitrogen gas. It's like a fire extinguisher foam. So they spread that foam in mass over the birds and they suffocate. So to date, 90 million broilers have been culled this way because they've identified avian influenza among a population. There have been over 35 dairy herds where they identified avian influenza, and of course they have to kill all those cows as well. Those are dairy cows. They would have been killed around 5 years of life. Remember, a cow can live about 20 years naturally. Dairy is a stopping off point for low grade beef. So we drink milk, we're basically subsidizing the production of cheap low grade beef. The cows are killed at about a quarter of their life expectancy. So all these things, I just want to paint the picture of the modern animal agriculture system that allows viruses to emerge, spread, and potentially infect, the humans. I think from the viral perspective, right? This thing, it doesn't have a nervous system. It's not alive, but it's incredibly savvy, and all it wants to do is perpetuate itself. So how does it do that? If it can get a mutation, if it can do the genetic reassortment, which is when two strains of a virus co-infect a host, like a bird or a cow or a pig, and then you can make a third novel virus that's been reassorted. If they can pull off any of these magic tricks to become more versatile and infect human hosts, it would love nothing other than to do that. And so that's what we're up against. It's a powerful evolutionary mechanism, and we're basically asking for it. So we'll get into some solutions, but do either of you want to add to that?
Well, this is very disturbing, to say the least. I remember many years ago, Michael Greger wrote a book, Dr. Michael Greger, about bird flu, but we were only worried about humans getting it at that time.
Indeed, that's and that's what Dr. Greger was trying to tell us, that this is not going to be confined just to chickens at this point. And don't let it's bird flu. Don't let that name seduce you there. This is a rough, tough gunslinger of a virus, and it's a master of disguises and espionage, sneaking in behind enemy immune lines, if you will. I won't take that analogy much further, but this is a formidable virus, and it's going to come back to chickens. This is a sin against the avian poultry kingdom, if you will, and they're in a way poetically exacting their revenge. Of course, none of this is intentional, but this is biology, and we're violating the laws of biology to our desire for cheap chicken for economic reasons and taste reasons. But meanwhile, with a balloon, you squeeze it in one area there and it bulges out another. Well, the same thing is with biology. You push in one area, well, something else is going to bulge out somewhere else, and that's what we're seeing here virologically. And so this is not something just to be ignored, saying, just bird flu. It's not just bird flu, as Dr. Burns is already mentioning. But the story doesn't stop there. They found the DNA of this virus in milk. How in the world is bird flu viruses winding up in cow's milk, thereby hangs a tail or a feather or an udder or something, some part of the cow there. Dr. Burns, you want to share your insights into this?
Sure. Yeah, you know, this is starting to get some media attention. It's not necessarily making practical suggestions like in how we can mitigate this issue, but it's the news is spreading. I think the transition from the virus only affecting birds to affecting dairy and being detected in dairy has freaked some people out. How did this happen? Well, remember that the wild birds who have the virus, predominantly that's the type of animal who's infected, wild birds. Well, there's a lot of cross contamination. If you have a poultry shed that's infected, it came from wild birds, but then there's some wild birds who pick up the virus. They can fly over, they can poop near a dairy facility. It gets into the dairy cows, and that's presumably how this happened. Different animals present differently in medicine. How do they present with the infection? Well, the birds typically have like upper respiratory symptoms. They do sneeze. They have more secretions. They also have these superficial skin hemorrhages, and they can get diarrhea. Well, mammals, often with the same avian influenza virus, they manifest with neurologic symptoms. We see that in the rodents, the suburban rodents, like we mentioned, the foxes and skunks. We see that in the marine creatures that Dr. Klaper showed on the slides, and also in the cows. So it's sad. Sometimes they'll act confused, deranged, in a situation where they would have been apprehensive of humans. They're no longer apprehensive. They sort of imagine like a rabid raccoon. They just sort of lose themselves and they start acting aberrantly. That's what they're seeing in cows. So we can update you guys on some current policy and monitoring. Basically, when something like this happens, the CDC gets involved. They're keeping a close eye. They're thinking about vaccines that may or may not work. There's the FDA, which is doing some testing, the Food and Drug Administration. And then there's the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has a branch called APHIS, which is in charge of detection. So they're doing all these experiments. They're sampling different products. They've sampled the poultry. You can detect avian influenza in chicken meat all over the country. What they're saying, though, is that when it's cooked adequately, it inactivates the virus. Okay. Same with beef. So far, they've found when there's avian influenza in beef, you cook it adequately, inactivates the virus. Theoretically, the human consumer couldn't get infected. What about milk? Well, pasteurization, they're really interested in whether pasteurization can inactivate the virus. So far, it looks like it does. That's when you boil the milk to kill off any germs. But after pasteurization, you still see viral particles. So the genetic material from the viruses, from the avian influenza virus in the milk that's actively being consumed by people throughout the country. I haven't seen much discussion of this, but we know that there's a theoretical risk of a human immune response. So there's the concept of a foreign body, a foreign antigen. If you have genetic material that your body's never seen because it's coming from this inactivated avian influenza virus, the body doesn't appreciate that. So it recognizes foreign bodies where it's amazing. Our immune system is absolutely incredible when it's functioning, and it detects these foreign bodies and it mounts a response. But sometimes it can mount too big of a response, right? And we have autoimmune issues that can result. So we've seen some of these things, like in the case, and Dr. Klaper, we've talked about some of these issues, like in the case of rheumatoid issues and autoimmune disease. When you have a whole society that's massively ramped up its consumption of things like cartilage and other animal byproducts from the meat that we consume, well, if you have animal cartilage, your body's going to build antibodies to fight it, right? But if those antibodies cross react with your own cartilage, your own joints, then you could develop things like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, other autoimmune conditions. So what is the risk of, say the virus is inactivated? We may not be getting an active bird flu virus from drinking the milk that it's in, but could we be setting our immune systems up for overactivation, autoimmune issues down the road? I don't think anyone really knows, but it's something we should think about.
Absolutely. And I've often felt that I'm amazed, well, that we don't see more autoimmune disease, but we are seeing it increase as we're eating not only all these foreign animal proteins, but with them we're doing everything from drinking alcohol to taking anti-inflammatories that make our gut leaky, that increase intestinal permeability, that allows these fragments of animal protein to get into our bloodstream, into our immune system. And I think that certainly rides that curve of increasing autoimmune disease. But I just want to point out, a rather distasteful reality of meat production here. Again, the meat industry doesn't advertise this on the 6 o'clock news, but in their relentless efforts to lower costs and get the most meat or milk out of their animals for the least amount of input of feed and money, etc. They're constantly looking for ways to become more efficient. Well, one is the chicken meat producers. Every 6 months or so, they kill all the chickens in the shed, and they have to clean out the shed. And so the skip loaders come in, and the shed has about 6 inches of what's called litter on the bottom. But what is it really? It's sawdust and wood shavings and chicken manure. You've had hundreds of thousands of chickens defecating into this, and so you've got 6 inches of sawdust and chicken manure. Now you can just push it all out and bury it, I suppose. But some of the enterprising folks in the meat industry said, well, that litter stuff here, it's got carbohydrates that ruminant animals can digest within the sawdust and wood shavings, and there's protein in the chicken manure. We're feeding the chickens corn and soy, and not all of it gets absorbed by the chicken. A lot of it comes out in their manure, so there's going to be protein in there. Carbohydrates, protein. Wow, what if we fed that? Cows can digest that. So can pigs, but cows certainly could digest that mixture. So the litter from the chicken manure droppings from the hen house are added into cattle feed, and up to 10% by weight of the feed mixture that's shoveled down the gullets of all these hundreds of millions of cows and pigs in the sheds there. 10% of it is chicken manure, is chicken litter from the hen houses. And the average cow consumes about 6 to 8 pounds of this stuff a day. Well, if the chickens all have, they're all shedding H1N1 virus in their manure, surely that virus is going to wind up mixed into the cattle feed. And so I'm sitting here watching people be shocked. How could this avian virus have gotten into the dairy milk? Well, duh, if you're feeding the cows the chicken manure, and this is clearly a virus that can be consumed orally and infect the animal, as we see with the sea lions, etc. How can we be surprised? It was inevitable. I was watching my watch how long it's going to take before that virus shows up in the dairy herd and in the milk. And that's indeed what's happening here. So if you're looking for another reason to get the cow's milk products and the dairy products out of your diet, realize that the remnants of the chicken manure that those cows were fed are fragments of that on some level, even if it's the fact that the DNA of the virus has shown up in the milk says that virus was in that milk at some time. Yes, the pasteurization the process, broke up the virus, but it was in that milk, which brings us around to the raw milk community, who are adamant, again, I don't want to, you denature the milk when you pasteurize it. Give me that milk the way nature intended it, right out of the udder. And you can get into that whole argument if you want, but one of the things you're buying for yourself, if you're drinking raw milk, natural as it may be, are those unpasteurized viruses that you may be consuming. So there's all sorts of ways that our barrier against this is a very porous barrier. We should not say, oh, well, you cook the virus, it kills them all. No, the pasteurized milk kills it all. Boy, you are betting your survival and the survival of our society on a very thin wall of protection there. And as I said, there's holes in that wall with the raw milk community, etc. So this is, we don't want to depress people. AJ's podcasts are really, are uplifting on every level. But if this is going to help you, if you're still eating poultry products in any form, if you're still consuming dairy products in any form, don't bring that stuff into your house and don't support those industries that are perpetuating these practices that are propagating this virus among both wild and domesticated animals there. So that's really where we go. We're trying to spare you and liberate you and give you a vision of a virus-free future. But also, if you're standing on the railroad tracks and a train is coming, as responsible physicians, it's up to us to say, the train is coming, get off those tracks. And that's what we're saying with the poultry and the dairy products as well.
Do you think that could this become another pandemic?
Absolutely. And that's what Dr. Greger is jumping up and down saying. That's why he entitled the book "Surviving the Next or Avoiding the Next Pandemic." Yes, that's exactly. If this virus, it clearly can get into humans if it learns how to get into lung secretions and travel by cough from human to human. Yes, then we put ourselves a fearsome pandemic. So that's what we're jumping up and down here trying to prevent.
So they'll give us
So to
another.
be clear,
Oh, sorry. I was just wondering if it's going to be a pandemic or they're going to create a bird flu vaccine.
Indeed,
sure.
they're working on it right
So
now. Go ahead, Dr. Mertens.
I could comment on those. So to be clear, there's no imminent risk of human to human transition, but there's a formidable threat that could happen. It just takes one mutation, one instance of viral reassortment for that to happen. It's just that at this particular moment, we don't have evidence of human to human spread. So there have been 2 human cases in the US, more globally, and they came from a poultry worker a couple of years ago, and then this year from a dairy worker. Now, if you do have human to human transmission, that's when it could be really concerning. That's when, depending on the severity, basically, how do we measure how bad an infection, an outbreak is going to be? Well, it's the transmissibility. How easily can you spread this thing? And it's the severity. Out of how many people, if it infects 10 people, how many of them will land in the hospital or even die? With COVID, despite it being so disruptive and awful, and as doctors, we saw people who were young. They could be young. We saw people die from COVID, but in the grand scheme, it was not a particularly virulent infection or severe, because the case mortality rate was pretty low. But these avian influenza, if it became a human pandemic, these are projected to have a high case mortality rate, meaning that a greater proportion of people who contract the virus will have a severe infection and could die. And remember that since COVID, we haven't really improved our baseline health in the West. So we're still seeing rampant obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure and cholesterol, autoimmune disease, and cancer. So we're not in a collectively, right? We're not in a good position to field this kind of threat if we started to have human transmission. I think even perhaps even more important than taking the steps to prevent the spread of avian influenza, we need to promote better baseline health so we can be more resilient whenever something, because inevitably something's going to come along. How can we be more resilient and basically optimize immune function? This immune system of ours, I find it's one of the most fascinating things in all of medicine. It's not to say I did great on my immunology exams in med school. It's so complicated, but it's really incredible. I mean, think about the most elaborate army that we've ever seen in human history. The immune system overwhelms that army. It's in one human body. Our immune system makes the most sophisticated man-made military operations in cities look silly. So we have to respect these natural phenomena. We can do that by promoting good baseline health.
Do you think this could ever get to our domesticated pets, like if we have dogs and cats, for example?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean,
Yes.
say you have a cat that's an outdoor cat. Cat eats a bird, wild bird, has avian influenza. That's all it takes.
Right. Dr. Bird's made such a valid point here about the importance of your own immune system and the virulency of the virus, in that when he was talking about the case mortality rate there, the COVID virus was pretty fearsome, killed 1 million Americans, but infected a lot more than that. Only one person out of every 150 who got the virus actually died from it. Well, we're talking about this avian virus. Instead of 1 out of 150, what if 1 out of every 4 people died, or 1 out of every 6 people? It would really start crippling our society here, and it just takes one little mutation on the virus DNA to make it that lethal. No matter how lethal it is, however, most people will survive it, and you just want to really enhance the possibility of surviving this. During the COVID thing, my wife and I, we got COVID twice. It was achy for a couple of days. My nose ran for a week. It was done. It was gone. And it wasn't a terrible medical ordeal. But there would be a different story if I were obese and diabetic and had lung disease and high blood pressure and taking a bunch of medications. Would have been a different story. So the best thing you can do is get yourself as healthy as possible, and that starts with a diet based on whole plant foods. Drop that extra weight there. Get some sunshine in your skin every day. Get your vitamin D levels up. Eat lots of fresh green and yellow vegetables. Eat that salad every day, and really give your immune system what it's looking for. Get enough sleep is really important. When I get sick, it's usually because I'm cheating the clock there. I'm up till 3 in the morning writing a report or whatever, and I'm up again at 6. Well, 3 hours is enough. No, it's not enough. And within a day or two, my throat gets scratchy, and my body says you weren't fooling anybody there. So sleep is really important. Drinking enough water is important, so your secretions stay nice and thin. They have thick secretions, foster infections there. And then move those lungs, man. Go out for a walk every day and take some nice deep breaths. And you're an animal. Be a fit animal. We got to move. If it's their ticket of admission to the animal kingdom, unlike trees, we get to move. So take advantage of that. But again, all the pillars of lifestyle medicine, sleep, exercise, rest, avoidance of toxins, and a plant-based diet. Those are your real pillars to hopefully not be too scathed by this viral creature out there that is lurking and getting closer to us there. But most importantly, if the world became vegan tomorrow and all these animal sheds disappeared, so would the virus, and this whole thing would just disappear into the dustbin of history where it belongs. This is a self-inflicted disease because we're violating the natural laws of nature. And so again, protect yourself. Don't bring that stuff into your house, the meat, the dairy, the poultry, etc. And every time if you're out and you say, I'll have the fried chicken, you're telling that industry, good, lock up a few more chickens, feed some more chicken manure to the cattle. Don't support those industries with your dollars either. And so we want to empower you, not make you feel despairing here after our discussion. But I think it's an important discussion to have.
Is our government doing anything to ensure our safety?
Oh boy.
So those federal organizations like USDA, FDA, they're monitoring this. The problem is they can't possibly do as much testing as is warranted right now. So you really have to sample all the poultry sheds, all the dairy facilities, and it's impossible to do that, or we don't have the sort of political will to do that. There's a lot of conflict of interest. So remember, the USDA is basically subsidized. We through our tax money, we pay for subsidies for the meat, dairy, egg industries for the process, basically the corn and soy, the monocultures that become feed for cattle. So we do have some checks and balances in place from federal agencies, but they're not always. They have multiple priorities. It's not just preventing the next pandemic. It's also making sure that the dairy, the chicken, egg, and more broadly the meat industry is healthy as ever. So remember that without these subsidies, these industries, animal agriculture is so unstable, so economically tenuous that it would not have lasted. We're basically every year with the Farm Bill, we bail out these industries, or else they wouldn't have persisted. We'd already have a plant-based food system. So it's like really desperately perpetuating these industries on the policy level and also on the individual level, because we're still hungry for these products. We have to tackle it from a few different angles. But I wanted to raise one more point, which is more broadly, so this avian influenza is what we call a zoonotic infection. So something now we've seen evidence can come from the animal to humans. Well, zoonotic infections are not new. This is just the latest episode. So COVID was likely a zoonotic infection. There's some discussion about whether it came out of the lab, but all that evidence really points to it coming out of these wet markets in urban China, where different species from around the globe sit in these cages, and it's a breeding ground for novel pathogens and spread to human consumers. And let's say maybe put COVID aside. Well, there are so many other zoonotic infections, and they come from the industrial agriculture in the West and globally. They come from, so for example, mad cow disease, swine flu, past episodes of bird flu. Remember 1918 was a horrible flu pandemic that killed many people, and the case mortality rate was very high. So that's one of the things we look back at when we're thinking about how this could play out with our current bird flu. With the bushmeat trade, where people are going into natural forests and killing wild animals to trade for, because they are purported to have medicinal properties, and some people eat the meat itself. Well, that's the type of practice that brought us HIV, that brought us Ebola, and innumerable other infections like that that changed the world. It changed our medical landscape, and it's awful. There's industrial agriculture, there's bushmeat, there's poaching, and other forms of exploitation. Remember the deforestation that is required for us to keep expanding cattle grazing land and land to grow the grains, the massive quantity of grains that we need to keep dairy and beef cows fed. That deforestation changes ecosystems and exposes us to novel pathogens, more zoonotic infections. So they're just, smallpox, like the most infectious disease in the last century has come from our sort of increasingly unnatural interface with the natural world. That's most infectious diseases. So we have to think about our relation to the natural world. Can we sustain this, or are we just causing so much ecological imbalance that we're getting sick?
Dr. Burns mentioned the Farm Bill is coming up for reauthorization. Here's something that you can do, is let your voice be heard. Writing a note, whether email or an actual physical letter to your senator and your representative makes a huge difference. When these women and men get these notes, they know there's thousands of people who feel the same way. There's one person bothered to write me. But if you don't know who your representative or senator is, go to whoismyrepresentative.com and put in your zip code. They'll tell you exactly who your senator and representative is. Write them and say, I fervently urge you, as the Farm Bill authorization comes up, not to authorize government payments to animal-based industries, but instead, if any subsidies are being given out, that it goes to plant-based industries that promote human health. Just 3 lines is all you need to say, but let them know you are watching and it's your tax dollars that they are allocating here. So that's one thing you can do to really start changing things. Let's see. And again, keep yourself as healthy as you possibly can. That certainly makes sense. I have one other point, but I'll think about it in a minute there. Dr. Burns, any concluding comments or
Yeah, on a positive note, there's so much going on. I feel like 10 years ago when I went 100% plant-based, I was really involved, and at least in my local community, I knew all the vegan happenings and the plant-based healthcare stuff. I was aware of it all, but now there's so much activity in this space that I can't keep track. I heard there was a recent conference where Dr. Barnard zoomed in, and it was here in Providence. I had no idea. So I'm just delighted that there's how much is happening. Next week, we have Dr. Greger coming to Rhode Island Hospital down the street to speak with the residents, physicians, allied health professionals, particularly about how his latest theme of how not to age. There's so much going on. I do some animal welfare work separately. And last night, we're having face-to-face conversations with people. We show factory farm footage that most people have never seen. Or if somehow it crosses their social media page, they swipe it aside because it's so disturbing. But people, I'm finding people more and more receptive. They're willing to watch and face the reality of our food system. And I found them to be, this was just last night, they were so receptive. I had a little girl who was wearing like a kitty cat hat, and we helped her understand what she has a pet cat herself. And she started to understand, she's like 7 years old, but that her kitty cat like, she was so devoted to this pet cat, right? And you can feel that way toward other species, even if they're chickens, even if they're pigs or goats or cows or turkeys. They're actually not fundamentally any different than a cat or a dog that we love. That we, I was working with the orthopedist yesterday on my ortho rotation, and he's talking about the veterinary orthopedics, where people are spending tens of thousands of dollars for surgeries for their dogs and cats. Can you imagine, like, that sort of, just the imbalance between that sort of attitude toward one species, and then after you write that check for the dog's like knee arthroscopy, then you sit down to the table to have some chicken wings and a burger. Um, I'm actually optimistic, or else I wouldn't do this work. I think people are smart enough to make these connections, and that our food system will ultimately be a plant-based food system, and we just need to help expedite that change. So all of you who are watching, you're so powerful. We're all more powerful than we recognize. And what you can do is talk to people about these issues, educate yourself, and start having conversations. And don't be shy, right? And don't apologize for having compassion toward other beings, or for having concern from a public health standpoint about things like avian influenza spreading even more broadly.
I remember, go ahead, AJ.
Oh, I was going to say there's a really good question from Judy, who's watching live on Instagram, and she says, "Does the animal manure that we have to spread on our gardens even present a danger?"
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting point, the difference between organic gardening and veganic gardening. And the classic, as far as, unless they've changed it, the classic definition of organic gardening allows the use of animal products, soil amendments, blood meal, bone meal, etc. And of course, just regular manure. Questions what that animal whose manure you're spreading on your garden there, what that animal was fed, etc. And for that reason, the safer guideline is veganic gardening. Mother Nature knows how to grow a forest with just plant-based materials there. It keeps renewing the forest. You don't really need animal manure in your garden. And so I would urge people to do a little research and find out the best plant-based soil amendments and stick with them. I think it'd be safer all the way around. I remember what I was going to say before regarding the involvement of government agencies, etc. And yes, they're monitoring it and they're trying to develop vaccines, etc. But there's no question that the meat industry has committee members on every one of those organizations' committees there. And the root of the problem, reducing or eliminating our meat consumption, essentially never gets considered. In fact, looking at one of Dr. Greger's videos where he showed an article in a regular in an epidemiology journal, and the author was marveling that the thought of telling the public to reduce their chicken consumption is never even considered when it's actually the most powerful way to stem these epidemics here. And so just to put in perspective, do not be looking for the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, to lead the way to the real solution of stop eating this stuff, stop producing it and stop eating it. And that is where the power comes to you, the viewer. The place that you really have the power is pushing that cart down the supermarket aisle and deciding what's going in that basket. And if you don't buy the stuff, that changes the economics. It's no longer worthwhile for them to create it. And the same thing when you're sitting in that restaurant with that menu in your hand. Every time you turn to the wait person and say, "I'll have the chicken, I'll have the veal," your children's world, your grandchildren's world gets a little hotter and drier and deader, and those viruses say, yes, order another order of chicken there. So instead of feeling powerless, realize you, the viewer, have the ultimate power in your buying decisions and your eating decisions here. So we can de facto create the world we need to just by wiser consumer practices.
Colleen has a great question who's watching live on YouTube. Nice to see you again, Colleen. Should we be concerned about the food we feed our companion animals? Because that often contains, chicken in it, for example.
Absolutely. Pet food is basically a way for the meat industry to be more profitable. If they couldn't use the waste products for pet food, then they would have to throw them out and they would lose money. Their profit margin would decrease. So pet food is a huge, I'm glad you brought it up. I think your name is Colleen, because it's a huge issue. We're buying, we love our pets. We have cats and dogs, and we feed them meat twice a day on a massive scale. And that's the lowest quality meat. It's being made into pellets and Purina and all this stuff. I forget who made this point, but you know, we we're just imposing our attitudes on these pets. So like you go in the store and your pet food for the cat is right. It's like chicken or like something might be made of chicken or fish. Well, can you imagine if the can of cat food was made of mouse? Cats love mice. It's just that wouldn't sell on the shelves because humans get freaked out. So so you can see, and also there's no human mouse industry, so they couldn't use the byproducts to make the pet food. So yeah, there are ways that you can give your pet a very loving, healthy, nutrient replete, plant-based food system. So there are companies like Wild Earth for dogs that it's an entirely plant-based dog food, and it has all the nutrients they need. And people say, well, cats, they're really sort of omnivore, like they need some meat in the diet. They would in the wild, but now, I mean, let's be honest, our cats are domesticated, so we can control their diet. There's plant-based cat food that's supplemented with the amino acids they need to thrive. It's not unethical to feed your cat that way because you're giving them 100% of the nutrients they need. So do prioritize the plant-based options for dog and cat food. It's very important.
Thank you. Yeah. Or I mean, but I was going to say, if people had to feed their pets animals, make it themselves, but where are they going to get, good quality animal products if there is such a thing?
Indeed.
Yeah. Oh, so why doesn't our government care more about this issue or any issue really related to health and welfare? Because there's so much profit.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain there. Just Dr. Richard Oppenlander wrote this wonderful book. The title says it all: Comfortably Unaware. Comfortably unaware. And that's just where the meat and dairy industry and the government wants us to. Don't worry about it. You just keep eating your burgers and your buffalo wings, and don't worry about that other stuff. We got it under control. And look what's happening. Ask 14,000 elephant seals if you have it under control. There are dead carcasses rotting on the beach now. And these viruses spread through mammals. And we found out the hard way with COVID, and I'm afraid, and Dr. Greger's afraid we're going to find out the hard way some of these other avian viruses. So yeah, now the government, we're reactive. Only when the crisis is happening, then we marshal the troops and get those respirators made and get those those N94 masks in from China. We marshal the troops when the enemy's already on the beaches here, but it shouldn't have to be that way. We're smart human beings. We ought to see this threat coming and do the hard, but it's not that hard. But stop. We've used animal eating up. It is now turned on us. It's become monstrous. No matter what role it played throughout history, the mighty hunter and all that, doesn't matter. What it's become is monstrous and is threatening our existence, and we need to turn the page on it. We used to do a lot of things. We used to harpoon whales in the head. It makes us say, my God, I can't believe we did that. We used to buy and sell black people. We now say, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. Well, we used to raise hundreds of millions of cows and pigs and chickens in big sheds. I can't believe we did that. We ate them. We need to make that transition to a plant-based society, and everything will get better. We'll get healthier. The world will heal. The animals stop suffering. Everything gets better. The flag's waiting. Homo sapiens, if you want to survive individually or as a species, adopt a whole food plant-based diet. That's the message.
I'm curious what both you gentlemen think about lab-grown meat. Could this solve the insatiable desire for animal products for people or people's domesticated pets that prefer to eat them in a humane and sustainable way that won't involve the transmission of these diseases?
Sure. So there's a burgeoning movement of products, research and product development in both the two categories, really. There's plant-based meat, where it's made to be very realistic. It's like, the Impossible Burger. It tastes really realistic, but it's plant-based. It's not lab grown. And sometimes that can use precision fermentation, where they make an actual animal protein, like the heme, like the heme molecule that's in Impossible Burgers. They make it through mycelium or some other plant-based method, and they create a realistic plant-based thing. Then there's molecular meat, which is growing actual animal cells in a petri dish. Initially, and probably still, you need at least some stem cells from the original animal, but that's probably going to become obsolete, where you can just make the animal protein. Remember, this is bioidentical to meat, but it doesn't involve animal. So it's like having the animal product without the animal. This is a really huge area. It's complicated, and I think we need to be really thoughtful about its development. I think it is the future between plant-based and lab-grown meat. There's so many issues that it completely resolves. So there's the issue of 80 billion land animals being killed painfully every year. There's the issue of the CO2 emissions, other environmental calamities coming out of livestock production, the deforestation, the acidification of the oceans. That kind of protein development would completely resolve those issues. Working conditions in the industrial facilities for these people, mostly immigrants, it would resolve that. You could even, but then we get to the health side. Okay. I'm actually optimistic that we could tailor these animal products, the lab grown or plant-based animal products, make them actually healthier than the existing animal products today, so that because they wouldn't have hormones, antibiotics, they wouldn't have all sorts of bioconcentrated metals and plastics. And so for those reasons, they become intrinsically healthier. Okay, here's where I transition. At the same time, we don't want to promote a future where we're eating the same quantity of animal products that we are today, just in another form, because that will not solve the chronic disease issue. If we keep eating the same amount of animal protein and fat, it doesn't matter which method it's produced in, then we'll still have the obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease, cancer, you name it. So it's going to be a combination. I think it's a really key interim solution, because we're not going to have everyone going plant-based overnight. But I think we have to be thoughtful about it and make sure that it's part of a future food system that also makes actual fruits and vegetables, beans, whole grains more readily accessible and nutritious.
Have you heard of Paul Shapiro and the Better Meat Company, where he takes like fermented mycoprotein from fungi? I'm going to be having him on the show next week, so I'm curious to learn about this.
Cool. I'm not familiar with him, but it sounds really interesting. They're using mycelium to grow certain compounds that we associate with meat, but you could do it without the animal.
Well, maybe this is the future.
Anything's better than what we have now. And as I said, as Dr. Burns said, there's so many advantages. It ends animal cruelty, the lab-grown meat, and you don't have the antibiotics and contaminants. But as he also rightly said, it's still eating meat, and packing your intestines full of meat 2-3 times a day still, I think, puts you at risk for everything from colon cancer to dementia to Alzheimer's to heart disease. So it's certainly from the health viewpoint, it's probably minimally beneficial, but from every other viewpoint, yes, it sure beats the factory farm system we have today. So I'm rooting those folks on, but a little bit skittish about the health effects. But if we don't have a healthy planet, none of anything else is going to make any difference. It doesn't matter what your cholesterol is, and so if that seems to be a juggernaut that's proceeding, I wish them success, but as a physician, I have reservations.
And it's interesting. I remember hearing you give a talk once, Dr. Klaper, that there are no failed vegans that were born vegan and raised vegan, and you've known quite a few of them. And I'm trying to think about this insatiable desire for animal products, because you and I, Dr. Klaper, have been vegan a long time. It's almost 50 years for me. And I'm not ever trying to recreate the taste and texture of meat in food. I mean, to me, it was disgusting when I was a kid. I mean, I'm glad these products exist, don't get me wrong, but I'm wondering, like, if people that were raised, born vegan, are they looking for the, like the Beyond Burger and the Beyond Meat and all this stuff? If we could just get people to, the next generation didn't have to grow up eating animals, they probably wouldn't want them so much.
I think that's true. I think increasingly we'll have people raised more plant-based. They won't necessarily crave the chewy animal product in their mouth. But we have to be realistic about the developing world. So meat production, I mean, it's just, I don't like saying it because it's just so depressing, but animal product consumption is expected to increase because of, people coming out of poverty throughout the world, which is of course important, but the increased demand for meat. And so how do we basically mitigate that rise in the demand for meat? Well, if we have these bioidentical products or similar and tasty products, that's how we could reduce the demand and avert just worsening disaster. It's hard to imagine, but this can get worse when demand for meat rises. So we basically develop these technologies to make alternative protein, and then we can disrupt the industry and start turning down the trends on all the issues that we've talked about that modern livestock production is influencing.
Yep. Well, you guys are certainly doing your part. You got to
You
get more
too.
doctors on board, but it's like, well, I guess that's what PCRM kind of was always about, but it's, you ever feel like kind of like lone wolves out there?
Well, we're trying to remedy that. That's what moving medicine forward is about, is to reach those doctors and wake them up with the plant-based alarm clock here. And Dr. Burns yesterday has said, his hand surgeon specialist that he was working with was grumbling that now they're asking us to talk to our patients about nutrition. And I don't know anything about nutrition. I don't have time to, I'm a hand surgeon. I don't have time to talk about this. But this is such a teachable moment that we really need to take advantage of. So we're going to come up with either a one-page or even a business card information nugget there saying, don't know what to tell your patients about nutrition? Give them this card. And there's websites for forks over knives and what the health, etc. And at least to be able to start filling in these gaps to enlist the whole medical community, including the specialist community, into acknowledging the importance of plant-based nutrition and helping their patients move in that direction. So yes, it's an area that we are working. We don't want to be lone wolves. We want to get all the medical profession into the plant-based awareness. And we're getting there, slow but sure, we're getting there.
There's a lot happening here with medical students getting exposed to proper nutrition, and because it was really lacking. Like, you don't have to be plant-based yourself to realize that nutrition, the absence of nutrition education in med school is harming society. But yes, our Moving Medicine Forward is devoted to med student education. Dr. Klaper and I are out speaking with students around the country, often by Zoom, so it's simple. And if they get that memo early in their education, it can be really powerful. I've seen it for me. I'm one example. It has completely shaped my career. There are so many other people who they get on the wards their third year because they've been in the classroom for 2 years in med school. Then their third year, they get, and they see that 8 or 9 out of 10 people on that hospital floor are there specifically because of what they've been eating for 10 or 15 or 20 years. It's really, so they get it. These are smart people, and they want to address the root cause. So I really feel that my generation of doctors is getting the picture. Yeah, some are more enticed by, like the sort of high tech aspects of medicine. They want to be in the operating room or work with the newest chemotherapy agents, but that's still most of us are seeing patients over time. Even if you're a specialist in cardiology or pulmonology, you get to know your patients, and anyone can intervene on lifestyle. And more of us are making the connection between diet and disease.
The thing is in hospitals, they serve deplorable food, both in the cafeteria to the guests and even to the patients.
Yeah.
Hospital food is one of the great oxymorons in the English language, hospital food. And it's sad, it's tragic, but it's an acupuncture point that can be exploited and remedied. And if patients who were in the hospital write to the administrator saying, I got great care in the hospital, but I was really disappointed by what came up on my tray from dietary. And if the residents and the interns were saying, the food we're being fed in the cafeteria, we want a fresh salad every day, we want a plant-based entree every day. Ask and you shall receive, someone once said. So this is the place for both patient consumers and people in the healthcare system, the nurses, the orderlies in the hospital, everyone who's eating that cafeteria. Let the administration know that you want healthy plant-based options on that cafeteria line, and they will appear. And so this is not time for despair, it's a time for action.
If anyone's involved in a institution like a school or a hospital, any sort of institution, you got to know about Greener by Default. It's a nonprofit that partners with institutions to make their food that they've served more plant-based. They're incredibly effective. They're the masterminds behind this big New York public hospital change, where now all the inpatient food is by default plant-based, 100% plant-based, and you can opt out. So you can sell this kind of method to the administration of a hospital and say, we're not forcing people to do something. It's just the initial option is plant-based and totally palatable and delicious and culturally sensitive. And they're so Greener by Default, they're really good. They've made that change in New York so that millions of inpatients every year are now eating a plant-based diet when they're hospitalized. So over 60% of those patients do not opt out, and they stick with I mean, think about how many people previously were doing 100% plant-based diet when they're hospitalized, maybe 2%, who knows. Now it's over 60%. So this is, I think, a really scalable strategy that you can bring to your schools, hospitals, churches, anywhere that provides food. On the local level, I'm excited to circulate a petition. It's coming out Monday, that will call on my colleagues to say whether we want to keep serving bacon to inpatients at the hospital here in Rhode Island. I feel good about. I think that people will sort of unanimously endorse this petition, because it just doesn't feel good to have patients that you're supposed to care for them and you're supposed to let them recover and send them out of the hospital to live their lives. But meanwhile, you see when you're on morning rounds, you see that they've got a pile of sort of tepid scrambled eggs and a bundle of soggy bacon. We know that bacon's a type 1 carcinogen. It's the same level of evidence for its causing cancer as tobacco and asbestos. So we're doing that at my hospital, and I'll look forward to letting you know how it goes.
I have an idea. How about you stop the McDonald's being allowed in hospitals? In 1977, I was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, and my roommate's sister was admitted to Children's Hospital, and we went to visit her, and there was a McDonald's in the lobby. And then Ronald McDonald has all these houses to help children with cancer when they're the ones that are giving it to them.
So it's stunning when you walk into the lobby and you see a fast food outlet there. More and more hospitals are starting to rebel against that. And it just takes one attending physician on the staff. I know Dr. Srice-Dancic did it in New Jersey, her hospital there, but this is outrageous. But the hospital's making money off the fast food restaurant, and so they've got their bottom line arguments for keeping it in place. But they can't do it at the risk of the expense of their credibility and of the welfare of their patients. It's going to be a steady downward trend, those fast food outlets in the hospital lobbies there. And what Dr. Burns is saying is so exciting. Green by default, that's brilliant, and that's really what it should be. And AJ puts that in the show notes here, but that concept says it. It should be green by default. So serve your patients a healthy plant-based meal as the baseline there, and if they want the meat, they have to ask for it. I think it's brilliant, and everybody's life should use that as a guidepost here. Green by default, I think is brilliant. And if anyone wants to know about our work in moving medicine forward, I'm sure AJ will have the link there.
Whatever you guys like, that's always in the show note. And Zach, if you want to give me the green by default, we'll add it. Well, we're just about out of time. And there is a question that 2 viewers have in the chat, but it's not about this topic. So would you guys like to take a stab at it, or should I tell them to just bring it back next month when you're doing your Q&A?
Bring it on.
Okay.
We'll take the questions, but again, viewers, next week, next month is all Q&A, and it will be a little more uplifting.
Right. It won't be so depressing. Okay, thank you. So 2 people want to know, I'm curious what the doctors think about nuts and seeds for health. Way better than chicken, that's for sure.
Way better, absolutely.
Nuts and seeds are great. I'll start with it and then pass it over to Dr. Klaper. Sure. So nuts are an important source of plant protein. They have evidence for cardiovascular disease prevention in moderation. So you want to have a handful of unsalted, unroasted nuts a day. And remember, they can be dry roasted. That means they don't have oil. But if it says roasted, that means they were just like roasted in oil. So you don't need more fat on top of a nut that's already higher in fat. But enjoy your, especially walnuts and almonds, which are high in omega-3 fatty acids. Enjoy those in moderation. Seeds, also a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. Chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds. Some argue you should be really disciplined about your seeds and have a tablespoon of ground flax meal every day. Omega-3s are important for neurologic health and heart health as well.
Pitch perfect, Dr. Burns. He mentioned all the reasons why nuts and seeds belong in your diet, and a handful of unroasted walnuts, etc., sunflower seeds, they're wonderful. As Dr. Russell says, the fear is as soon as you say nuts are okay, then it gives permission for someone to sit in front of the TV with a 5-pound bag of roasted cashews and shovel them in by the handful. Well, the doctor said nuts are okay. That's gluttony. That is not okay. But again, a handful a day of unroasted nuts absolutely have a valid place in your diet.
You're so tall, Dr. Klaper. Your hand's a lot bigger than mine.
Fair
You get to have a lot more. That's for
right.
sure. As sad as this was very informative. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you both, and look forward to the monster Q&A we're going to have next month, the second Saturday of June, which I believe is June 8th.
We'll see you
Thank you,
then.
Chef AJ.
Thank you. And if you guys would like to help their work and contribute to moving medicine forward, it's a nonprofit organization. Your contribution is tax deductible, and the link is right below. Thanks for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time for Nutrition Insights with Dr. Peter Rogers. He is going to be talking about Western abdominal diseases. They're Western because the people in the world that don't eat like us just don't seem to get them. Take care, everyone, and happy Mother's Day tomorrow. Bye-bye.